When it's sunny outside, the best thing for me to do is read a book. What does usually end up something like this. I finished 2 books recently, Blood of Elves and Court of Thorns and Roses. This got me thinking about story payoffs, and the story payoffs in most games are usually a final boss. Some of the best moments in video games are these final bosses. There are some moments that don't need this boss. We can see payoffs through visuals and, oh no, don't look at that. Then there's some games that really don't have either, and some that are in the middle. Welcome back to Mumbling Game. On today's Mumble, we'll be mumbling about the video game boss payoff. Before we begin, remember to like and subscribe for future mumbles. Click down below to support the channel and subscribe for future mumbles. And there's
no way out for us.
A boss fight. We all know what it is. The exam of the video game realm. The health bar with the girl. The part of the game that as gamers take literal days to defeat. Again. Let's try one more time. One more time at this boss.
Several days later.
Okay, one more. This time we can do it. We can do this. Let's go. But what is a payoff boss fight? The payoff boss is a boss fight that you don't really think about the gameplay around it. You're not thinking parry, attack, watch out for the spear, jump, thunder, attack. You get the picture. I'm talking about the boss fight. You don't think much about this. Instead, you think about the character that you are fighting right in front of you. The adventure when is trying to take over your country and has your uncle as a hostage. However, when you come eye to eye with this boss to pay off, giving him that final killing blow, this guy has beaten you. He's forced you to break your moral code, becoming more like him. 2 drops of oil in the water of Japan. Defeating him is a massive payoff to the story, what does lead to the second boss fight, what maybe is even more important because of the boss fight before. As the hate for Khan, the ghost of the previous boss is there in the next boss fight. This is being a perfect payoff boss. It's like finishing that book. We have that character going through different things, the world affecting him, and the villain is affecting this world, and therefore the character. And in the end, the overarching overcoming this villain is a payoff. Ghost of Tsushima has this payoff, even though the open world and side quests do kind of damage the payoff sometimes. There's a lot of side quests that the Khan character, this villainous character, is affecting this world, and this is the reason you're on these side quests. Even though it does feel weird that I am trying to be the greatest swordmaster ever, like no one ever was. Get it, the reference? I wanna be the very swordmaster, the very best swordmaster, like no one ever was. I know this is just a training montage for that final fight with... However, a series that is kind of the blueprint for payoff boss could be Metal Gear Solid. The whole series really, apart from maybe 2 and 5. It could literally be the template for the payoff boss, even though the story does get slightly confusing. Big Boss, your mentor who betrayed your country, but kind of good reasons when we learn through the game. She assembles the group you fight through the game, make you feel like you know more and more about the big boss. As you fight through the old to the bat buzz, you learn more, and you kind of don't want to fight this character. You like Big Boss, you kind of agree with her reasons why she did what she did, because she kind of did it for her country as a secret agent. I don't know, it's a confusing story, I can't remember 100%.
Looks like your luck hasn't run out yet.
They force you to fight her. She forces you to fight her as you don't want to fight your mentor. And you know that she didn't really want to fight you. A timer is set off, and through defeating this boss, it's like finishing that story, giving it really one of the greatest payoffs in video games, and that is that boss payoff. Then somehow we go that step further with the next game, that Metal Gear 4, and it sets up that bigger payoff for me. As it does kind of feel like Metal Gear 3 being a prequel, and the boss still feels very much connected to that game, but not on the rest of the series so much. The big boss, that payoff, that big boss payoff is such a good payoff for that game. Doesn't really affect the overarching story as it is a prequel. For that game, that is one of the greatest boss payoffs ever. But the next one is kind of bare.
You're pretty good.
You're pretty good.
Take this for example. The two books I read recently, what I finished reading recently, were The Blood of Elves and The Course of Thorns and Roses. Two completely different books with two completely different payoffs. The payoff of both of these books can be led back to this boss payoff theory. Even though Court of Roses was written further down the line and it wasn't translated from Polish, Blood and Elves doesn't really have any sort of kind of payoff, that boss fight feeling in any sort of way, making the book feel a bit off. Sometimes. No offense to Witcher readers, I'd read two of them, I missed one of them, but Blood of Elves lacked payoff. The Court of Thorns and Roses, however, has a literal sub-boss that was affecting the world all around it, and it ended with a kind of boss fight at the end. This being a great example of a book having a payoff boss fight that could easily be used in a game. Amarantha, whatever her name was, I always get the names confused, is kind of similar to Boulder from God of War, as a sub-boss to the main boss later down the line. If we're taking the story template of Court of the Roses and translating it to God of War 2018. Not every boss needs that big story detail. My favourite boss comes down to a Last of Us Part 1, that bloater in that basketball arena randomly, that school playground, whatever it was, that in that small area, it was horrifying and amazing. The Last of Us game series is another example of that payoff boss, without spoiling Last of Us Part 2, with the sequel arguably having the better ending than the previous due to the payoff boss at the end. But I am not going into that apocalyptic debate as I'm currently playing Last of Us Part 2 again for a video.
What's wrong, McFly? Chicken?
A debate I will get into is the Metal Gear 4 boss debate, as I think it's a much better payoff and maybe could possibly be a blueprint for the payoff boss theory I just made up. It felt like the whole series of Metal Gear led up to this maybe fighting Liquid Ocelot. Okay, I'm just going to call him Liquid. The story might not be ironclad. Okay, it could be pretty confusing, but Liquid's story is epic. Not only is he the son of the boss, he is technically the brother of the main character, Solid Snake, and the son of the boss, the character from the third game.
Sometimes I'll start a sentence, and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way.
This villain has so much influence on the series of this game, and it still feels original. Even the boss fight uses the history of the past fights. Past variations of the characters over the years are in this boss fight, and it concludes and pays off years of story in one final boss fight, making this really the catalyst for payoff bosses. It has music, it has style, it has story. It all pays off with one boss fight, and it is just the perfect payoff.
It's enough to make a grown man cry. But not this man. Get back in there, Tia.
I'm a big AEW fan. I was at Wembley twice for All In. MJF and Bryan Danielson's match on year 1 and year 2 were great payoffs, and there's a saying in wrestling, it's how you leave them. Anti-payoff, the under-payoff boss, so to speak, they can really ruin a whole game's experience. The Slug King in Demon Souls is an example of this. Demon Souls being the launch point for the Dark Souls, the Souls series, the Elden Ring, every Souls game ever from the FromSoft universe, so to speak. It's not a contrary take for the game that it's a very boss heavy and focused on massive fights to tell stories. Then the final boss of Demon Souls, the first one, the OG, the original DS, is a slug. I know, okay, this has its story reasons. For the game, it prides itself on bosses. It's deflating. Maybe a worse culprit, having maybe the worst payoff bosses in any game, really? We go back to Fable 2. This really being the perfect example, as that game has a solid story full of highs and lows, a good system in place that makes it a great game. The main villain is so hateable. He literally killed your relative and your dog. But in the end, it's maybe the worst payoff boss fight ever, with you just pressing one button and shooting your pistol, bang bang, you're done.
You great big Balverin turd!
Do you want your dog back or the money? If you pick the money, you are evil. Always pick the dog. If you pick the money, you're going to hell. Anyway, the reason why this is maybe one of the worst payoff bosses is because I can barely remember other elements of the story because of how bad this boss was. And if I ever played it again, I don't think I'd even bother finishing it because it was so bad at the end. Even though if you do pick the money, you can kind of go back and just buy everything you want. I can't remember the third option. But I didn't pick the money. I brought back the dog. I definitely brought back the dog. Okay? I didn't bring back the money. The bad thing is that we can have a great experience throughout the whole game, but we can still not have that payoff boss. Let's go back to the FromSoft world for a minute and let's kind of open this sour jar. Going back to the Souls series again has some of the best endgame bosses ever, but Elden Ring, it missed at the last step, okay? The Elden Beast. Not an actual bad boss fight, but the story payoff is basically a glorified dragon named the Elden Beast, okay? The boss fight has no payoff. Red Dragon, even though it's a complex story, it has such a better payoff. The Elden Beast is very much a letdown, kind of just being a spiritual power that is just the essence of the land. It feels like it should have been something a bit step further, like other Dark Souls games have done. Bloodborne did it. Dark Souls 1 and 3 bosses are also fantastic. Gwen and all the essences of the, what's the soul called? You know, all the essences of the past lords, yeah, the past lords, I got there in the end, was great. But the essence of the land, for a good story like Elden Ring, it isn't that great of a payoff. And it kind of hyped that it would have that good payoff, even though Elden Ring is amazing. And it didn't really ruin the experience because it was a decent boss fight. It was difficult like Dark Souls Elden Ring was, so it didn't really ruin that experience, especially with Red Dragon at the end, and it did look different to a dragon, but still, for me, it always felt like a dragon. However, the worst one that cuts deep into my gaming soul, that felt like dropping that final bite of your favourite meal on the floor, God of War Ragnarok. Let me tell you a little story of my relationship with God of War and how it impacted me massively. In 2018, or before that, whenever the trailer was, obviously the trailer was out before, I remember seeing this trailer, getting so hyped up for it, I ended up going through a journey through every God of War game, even the PSP one. I played them all. It brought up that hype so hypey, so big, and then I played the game and it hit every milestone, it hit everything. It was a perfect game for me. It might not be for you, it was for me. It made me go into the video game industry. I was a QA for about 3 years before the whole industry imploded, but this game impacted me massively. This making Ragnarok maybe the most anticipated game for me ever. You can take your GTA 6 and shove it up your snake's arse. However, Ragnarok felt slightly weird. Maybe it's for me, but it did feel weird. I enjoyed playing it, but it felt like it was much more focused on a kind of technological mindset of development rather than story-based. It built to Ragnarok, but Odin as the last boss never pushed this story to the next level as it should have felt. It felt like there should have been a bigger veil to Odin, the slip into something else, a true definition of a fail to hit the mark payoff boss. This was meant to be Big Bad Odin, Allfather, but Baldur was a better boss, a god I didn't even know about before that game, and it was a better payoff than the Allfather, the god of gods, and that is a very sad payoff boss. It all leads up to this expectation how much this god has manipulated the world, killed fan favourite characters, and it was just generic. Similar to the Elden Beast, like any other dragon, it felt like you were just fighting a Valkyrie with Odin, and at that point you had done it like 15 times, leading to a very meh ending, making it feel like a bad payoff to a 2-game story. Even though these payoffs, boss fights, can ruin your whole gameplay experience when it is such a story element, there is a middle ground here. Spider-Man 2, a kind of good story throughout. The end boss was good, it had that story element, but the payoff of the boss was soured slightly. The story feels slightly off. That isn't new news, but the Venom story and the changes they did was pretty good. You can even play as him for a minute. I can't complain. However, staying away from that overarching story, the story they did with Peter Parker and Venom, I'm not going to spoil it here, was pretty good. It was different and it was fun. What does not work though is Miles Morales in this story because it takes away the dynamic of both of these characters, and it definitely feels apparent in the payoff boss of this game. It makes the boss boss feel middle ground and not the big payoff, because there is a character there that has no development with Venom. Odin at least had these connections to Kratos, Atreus and Freya, but Miles Morales shouldn't have really been in that story with Venom. Miles Morales does deserve something better somewhere, maybe a whole game or at least something decent, but Peter Parker versus Venom is a classic thing that could have had a massive payoff, but the combination here of Spider-Man and the payoff feel mid. There's definitely some tweaks that could have been made. There's maybe something they could have done with Miles and Venom that could have felt a much bigger payoff. But in Spider-Man 2, it's definitely felt like a mid-ending to what I thought was a pretty good adaptation of Venom. Okay, we've had a look at the good payoff bosses. We had a good at the bad payoff bosses. We also had a look at the kind of middle of the road, that nice but no spice kind of boss fight that pays off. We're also thinking, that boss fight in the middle was better. But what about when there's no boss fight? When it's just kind of a sequence to end the story? The no boss at the end of the game has always been a weird one for me. On one hand, you have these certain sequences in a game, Halo 3 and Reach are some of the best things that come to mind, have some of the best endings ever. Final Run maybe didn't have much of a story element, but it felt very epic for a Halo. And that last stand in Reach was, oh my god, it was so amazing, and the gameplay just felt so sad. On another similar line would be Red Dead Redemption. These types of endings that don't need that boss fight but still work out in a way that has that payoff ending is something special. But they also are always kind of sad. It does end with the death of the main character pretty often. These games that hit hardest without these boss fights are the games that hit harder on your emotions. Last was being maybe one of the best examples of this, that sequence at the end. No spoilers, don't worry. I know a lot of people will be playing the first game and watching the first series and doing all that kind of stuff because of the new series. Without the story, this sequence at the end, if you know, would have just been another clear the area type feeling. But the story that leads up, what you're doing, leaves so much heaviness to the story and to what you're doing. What could be easily out of context, just be basic. If you just threw someone in that level, it's just a normal level. But you know this is going to be heavy and this will be a payoff to a great story. These stories need this weight to make it not just feel like the same gameplay for 20 hours and have that payoff. There is another side to this though. While the gameplay of a game is so good, it struggles to run on the generation it released on. This being Control, a game that shocked me on so many levels of how good this game could be, and I didn't really understand what was happening. And this is apparent in the ending as well. You fight a generic enemy like you do in The Last of Us, but the lack of weight and really the copy and paste of more enemies felt like maybe one of the worst endings with maybe some of the best gameplay in a game. It had near to no payoff. It felt like it could have been a big boss fight, and for the lack of story, the boss fight could have maybe elevated the story a little bit higher. Maybe it could have had some sort of satisfying payoff, but like eating a chip with no dip, it's nice, and I could eat them for hours, but at some point, my mouth gets very dry, and by the end of Control, I just needed some water. In the end, literal payoff boss is a beautiful thing in games, and it can be compared to some great story endings. I use Quarter Hours as an example with Amarantha. Is it Amarantha? I think it's Amarantha. There's too many names, I can't remember. That was such a good payoff for a kind of character that you have saw manipulate this world, and then you have that payoff of her death, of that kind of boss fight at the end. But in films as well, Spider-Man versus Green Goblin, your Chucky versus Andy. Does anyone actually find that funny? Like Toy Story Andy and Chucky Andy share the same name, and it's about fighting, like, about toys come to life. Sorry, just something that just came to me. Anyway, and obviously my favourite payoff fights in film would be Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni. And when it's good, it can be perfect, but when it's bad, it can be sadly how you remember that game. And that's it for this Mumble. What do you think? What is your good payoff? What is your mid payoff? And what is your bad payoff boss? Comment below your thoughts. Remember to like and subscribe for future Mumbles. Comment below what you think of this type of video. Remember to check out the links as well to support the channel, as we have bloopers now, as I do a lot of bloopers. Here's a little taste of them bloopers, and I will see you on the next Mumble. I don't know if it's actually looking at me or not. I can't remember.